Welcome to the Emerald City Hockey Podcast. Join RJ and Dylan as they discuss each week's Seattle Kraken news and top stories from around the league.
Oh, RJ, how I'm going to miss the rain when I go back down south.
Yeah, have fun with the heat wave that's coming. I'm seeing temperatures in the high 80s, low 90s down there in Southern California. Good luck with that.
Yes, I got a text from my sister 3 times yesterday. It is 90 degrees. That's all it was, just 3 times. It is 90 degrees. And I'm just like, yep, sucks to be you. But but yeah, the weather has been awesome up here. Really, really enjoyed that change of pace. Enjoy some of this. Brings me back to my days growing up in San Jose. It's been really nice, and I mean everything's been nice up here this whole trip. Uh, Getting to spend some time with the grandparents now after all the go up there in Seattle with you. That was all fun, and real quick shout out. We are recording this on your birthday, Monday the 15th. So happy birthday!
Thanks, Dylan.
But yeah, so we thought, this week, because I'm still kind of in limbo, traveling, doing stuff, and the fact that I was up here for this week, we're going to do the podcast a little different. We're not going to quite go like game by game and break down everything like normal for this first part. I'll just kind of quickly share some of my thoughts from seeing everything, finally being able to experience everything that RJ's been getting to do. And then we're going to jump into some, basically the major questions that, the last couple of weeks have kind of brought to the forefront for all of us as Kraken fans. And that is, of course, questions about Coach Hakstol and questions about, goaltending and defense. So that's what we're going to kind of be doing today. Real quick, like I said, we'll kind of talk about the experience of being up here, going through everything. I had a lot of fun going to the games. Obviously, going to the games was awesome to finally be able to be at a Kraken game in person, to be able to do that in Climate Pledge Arena was a lot of fun. Getting able to be up there in the press bridge with you, even though it feels a little sketchy at times, just with the shaking and all the movement.
Yeah, you like
But
that?
yeah, my vertigo loved it. That's for sure. Especially the fact that for some of it you're like staring straight down over this ledge. Um, but no, it was a really really fun experience. That arena is beautiful. I love the windows. I don't think I'm ever gonna get over the windows. Not even just the windows that like overlook the like the ice and stuff itself, but just all throughout the main concourse. Just having all that natural light come in during the day and stuff is really really cool. I do think that is something that future arenas for any sport is going to start bringing in. We've seen that kind of creep into the NFL and those stadiums, but I think for more modern arenas, I think windows are going to be one of the big features. Crowd was awesome. Unfortunately, didn't get to see a win, and that was rough. But the crowds at both games was really lively, super into it. You can tell that the passion is very much still there for this team. Um, I know it's been rough, these kinds of losing streaks, especially this one we're on right now. But everybody still showed up. Everybody was loud. That was a lot of fun. Definitely one of the louder arenas I've been to. And then yesterday, being able to go to the practice facility for that practice, and it was cool that the fans were there. I think we've talked about that before. Anytime you can, kind of give fans access to that stuff, incorporate them more into the experience, that's a fabulous thing. I think that's something all sports teams should do. It's fans are the lifeblood of this whole experience. Without them, none of this works or exists. And so I think whenever you can bring them more involved into things, and really they're not super involved. They're just watching a practice, but it does give you the feel of being a little more involved with the team. It helps build that bond with the team. It helps build that bond with those players, and I think that's all really important for long-term success of a team, and especially a team that right now is maybe struggling a little on the ice.
Yeah, and you could
Iceplex is
see,
really cool.
yeah, and you could see
Yeah,
the
go for it.
players kind of felt the difference too. As someone who's kind of watched both, practices that have been open to the public and those that haven't, I think it was good for the team to kind of see that the fans were still there and excited about them and cheering for them when they did well in a drill. I think that's good for the morale, certainly given the situation that they've been in, and that was just really nice for me to see.
Yeah, for sure. And then the Iceplex as itself was really cool. I liked the aesthetic. Again, lots of windows. Rink 3 is kind of like right up, open to the side there. It's got lots of windows. That wasn't where the Kraken were, but I still like that, the idea that you could, be skating or play a hockey game right next to some windows, letting in natural light and stuff. That's something that, we're just not used to seeing. Certainly not in Southern California, where it's way too hot to have anything like that. So I thought that was a really, really cool feature. And then I just liked the general aesthetic. I liked the layout and how it kind of, everything is really accessible um, through everything. Because that's something that some, practice facilities I've been to, like the Kings one, can kind of turn into a maze pretty quick as you start trying to figure your way around to all the different rinks and all that stuff. So I liked how accessible everything was here, and then just the use of wood as kind of an accent color on walls and all of that. I thought that kind of gave it a nice, more comfortable feeling, and I was really appreciative of that. It just made it feel like a very nice and inviting place to be. So I do hope that everybody is, as you go through at some point, maybe you don't go there to see a practice, maybe you're just there to skate or something, but I do think it is worth a visit going out to that pretty sweet Northgate facility.
For sure. We also checked out the little team store that they had there. One thing I wanted to check was the jerseys, like the player T-shirts, to see kind of who was sold out, what they had. This is the first time, I want to say, the first time that I have seen them actually have some Brandon Tanev jerseys in stock. They've been sold out like every other time. I think they probably just got another shipment in. But yeah, he's been popular.
Yeah, and they only had one left.
That's
So
true. There was just one. So I'm sure someone went and grabbed it right after we were there.
yeah, and Eberle was sold out, so that was
Yes.
cool to see.
Yeah. That's
That
that's
gold
what scoring
streak,
8 goals in 8 games will do for you.
yeah, for sure. All right, but of course, we were at that facility because it was practice, and it was practice after another loss, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
Team seemed pretty, in good spirits despite everything. Whether that was just, because they knew they were going to be in front of all the fans and everybody, or whether it's because, maybe they're just trying to stay positive through everything. I will say it felt very different after that Minnesota loss than it did after the Anaheim loss.
For sure.
The Anaheim loss felt very much, everybody was very upset. Not like oh, we're sad, but like they were pretty angry with themselves and frustrated with everything. But after that Minnesota loss, you kind of got the sense that they were maybe trying to take maybe a different approach to dealing with it, where they were gonna, you know, try to focus on, okay, well, we've been doing some good things. Let's try to focus on that. Let's try not to take it too hard. It's one of 82. You know, maybe I, I haven't been there for all of them, so I can't say. But I do think that maybe if that is a change in tone from what they've been doing, I could see that maybe helping them out against Chicago in this upcoming game.
Yeah, it was interesting. Certainly after the Ducks game, I think both of us were interested to see, whether that kind of, really frustrated, angry with themselves kind of tone would stay going forward, especially after another loss. But yeah, I mean, good to see it didn't stick around too long. Yeah, I think, and it was interesting hearing the difference in the answers too after the games where you felt like after the Ducks game, it was just, almost didn't want to talk about everything that was going wrong, like we know, versus, after the Wild game, it was just, talking about the things they need to fix again and saying, taking responsibility for some things and also just saying, we just need a win. I don't care how it comes, we just need a win. And once we get one, we can kind of string things together. So I think that's kind of where the group is at.
Yeah, so that is definitely something we both felt should be brought up in all this. But A lot of the discourse this past week and through this losing streak has been about Coach Hakstol, so we should, go ahead and start there. We've seen it on, Twitter a bunch. We've seen it on really everybody's Twitter accounts, all the Kraken, whether it's reporters or fan accounts, right? That's kind of been the one of the big topics of conversation, and then certainly in our post game lives, it's been something we've touched on several times because many of you guys have brought it up. And I do think we are at the point where it does need to be talked about, and that is, is Coach Hakstol the right coach for this team? I still think it's maybe too early to be like demanding a firing. We are only 15 games into a season, but
Yeah, I got to
but
agree
it
with
is
you there.
something, yeah, but it is something we thought we'd bring up. So, RJ, do you kind of have, like, where are you at with Hackstall before we kind of get into any specifics about what we feel about him or maybe his style? Where are you kind of at?
Well, I mean, going into the season, it would have been very difficult, to imagine a scenario basically where I can imagine him being fired mid-season at any point. Just given, the nature of this being an expansion team, and it, I think the team also kind of wanted to temper expectations and be like, look, at a certain level, we don't know what's going to happen. This is still a pretty big unknown. This is only the second time this format has ever been done for an expansion team. And certainly with Hackstall being a more development type coach, I think there's less of an emphasis from the top on results early on, win-loss results early on. Um, so I think on some levels it's too early to judge. You can certainly have takeaways about whether you think he might be the right coach long term or not, and we will get into those. But I'm kind of at the point where I would like to see a little bit more. Earlier in the season, it felt like everything made sense even when things weren't going right. Going into that first homestand, the talk was about, after the first road trip kind of ended poorly, and you figured, well, they're tired, they still need to get some systems in. And he's like, all right, we're going to work on the transition game. We're going to make sure we're fast in transition, and that's what we're going to be really good at. And they worked on it really hard for 2 days in practice, and they came out against the Canucks, and it was a lot better. It was quite good. They lost the game, and that's unfortunate, but like that element was better. And then they're like, all right, cool, fix that. Good job coaching. What's next? And the two things were quick starts at home and the power play that he said were what needed to be worked on. And you look at those two things, and they haven't improved. In fact, you could argue that they're a little worse than they were at that point. So, anyway, sorry, I'll stop. I'm getting into my long-winded answer, but that's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah, no, and I think that's fine. I think it's all fair. Kind of going like segment by segment. Let's go ahead and start with that because that is something we with the expectations thing because that is something that we talked about during that last post game live, which was looking back to the expansion draft or even the announcement, his hiring press conference for Hackstall and stuff, right? Ron Francis was big on kind of talking in a way that made you feel like, at the time we all read it as, oh, he doesn't want to get everyone's hopes high based on Vegas just because that's such a high bar to clear. He's just trying to temper expectations a little bit. That way, if they don't, go and win a Stanley Cup year one, people aren't going to be disappointed or anything. But looking back with hindsight being what it is now, some of the things he said where he's talking about having a 3 to 5 year plan, all of a sudden that does feel like, well, maybe this is in some ways part of that plan. I do think they would like to have won more, particularly at home, to this point in the season. But I am starting to kind of think that yes, this team is more concerned with building something for the future rather than trying to equal Vegas's success or come in guns blazing and trying to really, put their stamp on this league right out of the gates.
Now you
Um,
bring up a good question though. How much I guess at the time and now did you kind of buy that talk about, well, we're not judging ourselves against Vegas. We're looking at a 3 to 5 year plan. We're looking at a bit long term because I think at a certain level, that's something that an expansion team is going to do anyway, and it's something certainly that I've heard that Vegas even did, where you want to temper expectations, not just for the fans, even for ownership too. I was talking to someone who knows some things inside the Vegas organization, and he was telling me a story of how early in the season, this is before everyone, they had come super hot out of the gate, and the expectations certainly weren't set as far as how well they were going to do, but where the GM's talking to the owner, and at that point, the Penguins were the previous Stanley Cup champions, and they had just gotten blown out at home. I think it was something like 8-1, 9 to, terrible game. And, the person I was talking to said, he heard the story that the GM was kind of turned into the owner, Bill Foley, and said, look, this can happen to anyone. You have the defending Cup champs just getting blown out on their home ice one night. So, like, if it happens to us, like, it can happen. So it shows that there's kind of this effort to temper expectations no matter what. So I guess that's my question: how much kind of do you think it's just something that it's natural for any management of any expansion team to do, versus how much do you really think that 3 to 5 year plan is there?
Yeah, I think certainly the management team in a normal circumstance wants to do that for an expansion team, just because traditionally things have always been rough for expansion teams in any sport, right? Just to come in the way they come in is always difficult. Obviously, the NHL did something very different these last two go arounds with Vegas and then with Seattle. The league was as a whole was not necessarily totally prepared for it with Vegas, and that's how you saw them make so many side deals and accumulate a lot of assets during their expansion draft process that we talked about at the time. A lot of GMs kind of wised up this go around. So I could certainly think that Ron Francis to some extent was also trying to even earlier than the draft itself, kind of explain to everybody like, hey, I've been talking with people and nobody's going to be doing these side deals with us. So, let me kind of put out the narrative that we're not going to necessarily be a Stanley Cup team right out of the gates, and or also accumulate a lot of draft assets that we can use to jumpstart our prospect pool the way Vegas did, even though Vegas then eventually turned around and largely traded away a lot of those assets for more
Pieces to win now.
current pieces. Yeah, that Seattle just wasn't going to have either of those two options, right? They weren't going to accumulate a bunch of draft picks to use to build for the future, and they weren't really going to accumulate assets that they can then flip for anything that can be used now either. So I do think that Ron Francis probably got that sense pretty early on in the whole process, like a year ago probably. He knew that, just talking with all the other general managers. So I'm sure he was also trying to temper expectations just for the expansion draft, and just to kind of get us to all, not be as surprised as we were when the day finally came and there were no side deals and we didn't accumulate a bunch of assets and we weren't, taking on bad contracts and using our cap space to kind of rake teams over the fire for first round picks and all that stuff that we saw with Vegas. And maybe he didn't do that too great because we were all still surprised on draft day.
Yeah.
But I also think just the fact that it is Ron Francis versus looking at Vegas with George McPhee, right?
Right.
George McPhee is coming from a situation in Washington where it was a win now situation. He is a little more of a win now type general manager. Whereas Ron Francis, if you look at his time in Carolina, he always put a big emphasis on having one of the league's best scouting staffs and trying to draft really well in the first couple rounds and stuff. Like, that was part of what he did in Carolina, and that's part of who he is as a general manager. So I think just the personality and stylistic differences between those two general managers for each of these last two expansion teams maybe also should have been something that we all looked a little closer at. Rather than just kind of saying it at the time, maybe it was something we really needed to digest a little more. But I mean, do you think that's reasonable to say now?
To an extent. I mean, don't want to even because we're kind of getting away from the Hakstol thing. But I could make more of an argument about why I don't think that's necessarily the case that the plan was a longer term thing. I think there's some evidence to the contrary, where certainly the free agent signings. If you think that your window is going to be 3 to 5 years from now, why are you signing a 29-year-old Jaden Schwartz? Why are you signing a 29-year-old Adam Larson to term? Why are you signing a 28-year-old Jamie Alexiak that by the time you get into your window, that you're going to be on kind of the tail end of those contracts where they're not looking as good? Why do you sign a 29-year-old Philip Grubauer? That's where, if you're taking the longer term approach, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. So that's kind of my evidence to the contrary, really. But,
I mean, it's possible that those were reactionary post-expansion. It's possible he had no idea that the expansion draft was going to go the way it did, and he wasn't going to be able to accumulate draft assets, and so he kind of did that in response.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we can kind of get into our evaluation of Ron Francis later. I do have a lot to say about that, but the Hakstol decision was go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, but yes, I guess bringing it back around to Hakstol, we knew Hakstol was a development coach, and that's why it kind of lends itself to thinking maybe the whole plan was a little more long term. And it's also worth bringing up that we're kind of also guessing that because the only other thing you can kind of say about it is that, well, Hakstol was just the coaching hire because essentially him and Ron Francis became friends, right? Like at that what was it, the World Cup, right? Or
Or
and
the World
so
Championships, yeah.
the World Championship, yeah. So because that's really the only other connection there is you're either saying you're hiring someone like Hakstol because you have this plan to want to develop long term and develop young players because that's what he's good at, that's what he's known for. But the other thing you can point to is just that they have worked together in the past and that they are friends.
Yeah, and I think that contributes in any coaching hire that any GM makes. It's rare that it's someone that they don't have any experience with. And when you look at Ron Francis too, he's worked with a lot of different people in the hockey world in his time there, whether it's as, a teammate or in management or what have you. But I think that did play a role. And because there were other guys that he knew. I mean, we were talking about Rick Tocchet as a potential coach. There were a few other guys that also had similar connections. So you kind of look at, what he was looking for. And at the time that the Kraken hired Hakstol, my whole argument on it was, don't say that the Kraken kind of struck out on guys like Gerard Gallant or, I know Quenneville was in the rumors at that time, those bigger names that people were hoping for, because I didn't think they struck out. I think Ron Francis got exactly what he was looking for. And because you look at the coaches that he did have some interest in, and they all kind of fit a profile, right? They were guys that were more known for either development or communication. They didn't necessarily have that NHL track record of like a lot of playoff success. And they kind of fit that mold, and that seems like what he was looking for, whether it was Hakstol or one of the other finalists.
Yeah. So again, that's kind of how we got sort of sidetracked in that long-term approach.
Yeah.
But I mean, let's go ahead and talk now, I guess, about those things. Do we feel that development and communication and all of that stuff has really been brought to the Kraken by Hakstol? Because I think at this point it's we're 15 games into the season. You've only got 4 wins, so obviously immediate success hasn't necessarily come and been brought to the table. I think given some of the stretches of losing streaks, you could argue he's not maybe like a motivational coach the way some guys are,
Right.
which is fine, right? Like I'm not that kind of coach either. That's a really hard thing to be. I also believe in that. But like as far as development, communication go, as you mentioned before, he improved the transition game when they wanted to do that, right?
Yep.
He knew how to do that. He knew how to get those guys to learn what system he felt was going to work well. But the more we see other problems develop in the team's game and not kind of get addressed, the more I wonder, was that maybe just a fluke, or or is it that he's just, maybe not as concerned as maybe the rest of us feel about things like the power play, or about maybe some of the defensive structures that they have going on.
I start to feel like it's the latter because we saw how much they work on the transition game. It's something that even now it seems like their primary focus, right? This was your first chance to really watch them, practice and we kind of work together on the ice in your visit here. And one of the things that we noticed is there's still a big emphasis on the transition game, and there wasn't as much of everything else as we'd like to see. So I think that when you do focus in on something, there has been success, but Hakstol hasn't always gone and focused in on some of the other things that need fixing. It seemed like he was kind of in denial about the power play for a while, even after a lot of us were kind of raising concerns. Um, some of the defensive things, we haven't seen him really, address as strongly, like, getting your man in the defensive zone, just, covering who your guy is, that sort of thing, where, to the extent that we've seen them practice it, and you look at this with the power play, when they do practice that, like that little play down low, the one that you talked about post game where they got the power play goal, they practiced that, they put it in a game, and it worked. They stopped being as predictable on the power play. So when they have been practicing things that's been working, the emphasis hasn't always been on the right thing, I think, at the right time.
Yeah, I mean, even one of the things we noticed while watching, the morning skates and the practices and stuff is, yes, they're still working on the transition game, but they're not even working on the part of the transition game that's been a problem for them, and that's been entering the offensive zone. They're really good at getting the puck out of their own zone. We've seen that, for many, many games now, and certainly all of the drills were built around that. But what we've seen time and time again is they get to the offensive zone, somebody will carry the puck in through the middle instead of just along the boards like they were doing. That really wasn't working. But now somebody will carry the puck in over the middle, and then they just kind of die in the high slot because no one's there with them, or guys are there with them, but they don't know where they are, right? Like, it's just a very fluid, guys are just where they end up, rather than there being some sort of structure or system there where it's like, okay, you're going to go in, and if you can go all the way, and maybe try to take a good shot from the slot. But if you get hung up, your first option is always going to be over here at the half board, or dropping back to the blue line, and then we can get everybody into the zone and establish ourselves there. Or, you know what I mean? Just some form of, or yeah, I mean, the other option would be some form of dump and chase, but I don't want that, and I don't think any of us do. But
No.
you know what I mean? Like some sort of set, like these are our things, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's just not really that happening right now. We just see them go into the zone, and then there's just no one around, and they either lose the puck or they try to force a bad pass through like triple coverage.
Yeah,
And so I want to see more of that focus from the transition game.
agreed. I mean, I think that would be a good thing to focus in on. Now, you touched earlier on. You touched on the development. Is he bringing the development? Because that's what a development coach is supposed to do. And when I think of evaluating the development of abilities of a coach, it kind of becomes this question of just, are the young guys getting better? That's how I see it. Are the young guys getting better? And on the Kraken, on this roster, I mean, you kind of look at, I don't know, what's your age cutoff? You're the scout. What's your age cutoff basically for when you think of the young guys when you talk about development?
I don't know that I would base it necessarily on age, but rather like years of experience.
Fair
And I
enough.
would say anybody with 4 or less years of experience would kind of be the cutoff for that. Because
Okay.
I feel like you generally you need like 2 years just to get the game to slow down a little bit, based on what we've always heard from guys. And then with certain other positions, like with face-offs, if you're a center, like you look at just about any of the top players, it was always around their fourth or fifth year that finally face-offs kind of came together for them.
Hmm.
That's something that you'll see across Jonathan Toews, Sidney Crosby, Steven Stamkos, all those top guys. It took a good 4 or 5 years before really you're starting to look and complete your all around game approach. You know what I mean?
Right. Okay, so looking at the Kraken roster then, guys who kind of fit that description, you've got Nathan Bastian, Morgan Geekie, uh, Hayden Fleury, Will Borgen, Jeremy Lauzon. Are those guys getting better? Is Nathan Bastian getting better? Is Morgan Geekie getting better? We have no real way to know if Will Borgen's getting better. Um, is Hayden Fleury
We
getting
can
better? Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say with Borgen, I guess we can assume he's not, considering Hakstol has basically said, well, when I feel like he's better than someone else, he'll be in the lineup. And
Yeah.
so obviously he's not getting better. And again, that's one of those things that I think you can point to. Really, with all of those guys that you mentioned, I think there's kind of been a feeling that maybe some of them have either not gotten better or they've all kind of gotten worse, right?
Yeah. I mean, I
Um,
I don't think we've seen that upward trend line for a guy like Morgan Geekie. He's got the skill that he's got, but we saw a very impressive showing in the first game of the season against Vegas, and I just don't know that there's been a whole lot of progression since then. I mean, it looked like Hayden Fleury had turned a corner and become something that we all kind of felt that he could be, and then he's been riding the bench the last couple games. Jeremy Lauzon, yeah, we've talked ad nauseum about that. I don't think we're seeing the upward trend line there, even though
but he's
there's signs of it. What do you think?
right, but I think with Lauzon, kind of like with um, Borgen, with Will Borgen, those are kind of the poster childs to say that no, the development isn't there, because just like you could say with Borgen, well, hey, he's not in the lineup, therefore he's not really being developed, he's not being helped at all. He's not improving his game. And, if it's one player, maybe you can just say, well, maybe that's just Will Borgen's problem. But I think Jeremy Lauzon is really the guy that brings it all together because we've seen him play so much.
Mm-hmm.
And the mistakes he's making are simple mistakes. It's not like he's trying to make aggressive plays like Vince Dunn, right?
Right.
Vince Dunn has run into some problems this year, but it's also because he's probably trying to do too much. Um, Whereas with Jeremy Lauzon, when he runs into problems, it's doing stuff that you try to coach out of guys when they're preteens or teenagers,
Yeah. It's
certainly at several levels before the NHL. And so I think that's probably the key piece to look at as far as every time Jeremy Lauzon tries to play the puck instead of playing the man, or every time he drifts away from his own net and leaves somebody, right in front of Grubauer, or every time he's just, not paying attention because his head's not on a swivel, he's just watching the puck, where he slides over to Larson's side, and you know what I mean, and both defensemen are now all of a sudden committed. Every time that happens, I think you can kind of, and the fact that they keep happening is where you can point to saying that the development just isn't there.
Yeah, I think you make a good point, and the mistakes are just the most coachable mistakes that you can have as far as just drifting away, losing your guy. So yeah, Lozon's a good example of that. And as I look at this roster and I just kind of see, I think what 5 guys that I named, you really look, the meat of this lineup is 29 years old, in that range, give or take a year. And those guys aren't typically ones that you would think that a development coach would be the right fit for, right?
Right, exactly. Generally, those are guys that you're looking for someone to either be maybe a little more tactical with, because you're trying to get the most out of all these guys in their prime. So you're trying to create plays or systems that's going to use everybody to their advantage, or you're looking for an excellent motivator or a leader of men, so to speak, right? Where guys aren't going to necessarily get too high or too low, right? You're going to limit things like losing streaks because you're just going to get everybody fired up, and you're going to get everybody to believe in themselves, and they're going to go out there and they're going to make sure that stuff like that doesn't happen. Again, those coaches are exceedingly rare. It's a very, very hard thing to do, especially in a sport like hockey where you're talking about 82 games. Um, but yeah, I mean, typically you don't want a developmental coach for those kinds of guys. You would assume that they know who they are as players at this point. You know who they are, they know who they are, they know what their strengths and weaknesses are. They're perfectly capable at that point of working on those things, right?
Mm-hmm.
Of watching tape themselves and seeing what they need to work on game to game. That's something like, Colin Blackwell talked about, right? Coming back, he said he was watching all the tape and he's kind of a tape nerd and all of that. Generally, guys who have been around in the league for 4 or 5 years plus, they understand, they know how to do that. They know how to take care of their bodies better between games, right? They know what works for them as far as rehabbing from injuries. All of those things that a development coach kind of brings to the young players and helps them understand and learn about themselves. The rest of this lineup, you know, in theory already knows about themselves. So you don't need to focus on that stuff. You can then focus on things in practice like, hey, let's create some systems for entering the offensive zone, or hey, let's work on moving around on the power play more because you guys are capable of that. So that is another area where, yes, I think him coming in as a development coach maybe hasn't lined up well with the roster.
Hmm. Now, as I mentioned before, you kind of got your first chance to, really watch them on the ice, practicing, working on things this week. Uh, and I'm curious, what did you think about, I don't know, kind of his style working with the players on the ice? I think you pointed out to me that there was, he was pretty heavily involved, and that's maybe something where you don't always see that, where sometimes the assistant coaches are more involved. Kind of go into what you thought about that.
Yeah, so I thought it was interesting that he was kind of dictating what the team was going to be doing, right? They would come together at center ice kind of more frequently than you're used to seeing, or at least that I'm used to seeing, as far as him bringing everybody around, explaining what drill they're going to do, and then, yes, being the coach with the whistle that is going to start and stop every rep of the drill. That's not something you generally see too much around the NHL. Usually, the assistants, the head coach will talk with the assistants about stuff, and then the assistants will run the drill and the head coach will kind of float around and observe things, talk to guys, right, pull guys aside and say, hey, I'm seeing you're maybe doing this, maybe try that, or just kind of be taking a mental picture of where everybody's at, seeing what's working, what's not working, and then you'll reconvene with your assistant coaches later and maybe work on tweaking a drill or changing up what drills you're doing, rather than being focused on making sure you're starting and stopping the rep on time, right? Like, okay, that was the
Hmm.
second shot that you guys have tried. That's it. Instead of thinking about stuff like that because you're actively running it, you can kind of take a step back and look at the bigger picture more. So I do wonder if that is something that is maybe contributing to some of the other stuff we've been talking about.
Yeah, it's certainly possible. Um, So there's one question I think about, the coaching. We move on to the tactics, and there's one question we've gotten, I think, more than any other in this past week. We've got to talk about the goalie pulls, right, Dylan?
Oh my gosh.
We
Yes.
had to get there. Yeah, we're not gonna bury that any further. Let's talk about pulling the goalie, and specifically pulling the goalie early, and we also have to talk about the execution. So why don't you just remind everyone kind of what's happened with the goalie pulls the last couple games?
So in that first game of this new home stretch, in that Anaheim game, you had that very awkward goalie pull. It was what, 2:20 ish left in the
Thereabouts.
period, in the third period. Uh, Kraken are down. They go to pull Grubauer, and as they go to pull Grubauer, as the word gets out to Grubauer and he starts skating, four of the five Kraken on the ice also decide that it's time for a line change, even though they had possession in the offensive zone. So right away, you and I both were like, this is something we've never seen before. And predictably, when you then only have one player on the ice, um, in the offensive zone trying to keep possession of the puck all by themselves, they turned it over because how could you not in that situation? It's 5-on-1, and the Ducks go down and they score, easily on the empty net, because then there was massive confusion as possession was lost during the line change and during Grubauer getting to the bench. There was a lot of confusion going on, and ultimately the Kraken ended up with only five guys out there. Like, they completed the line change, but they didn't
No
add
extra
any
skater.
extra attacker. Yeah. So that was a horrendous result for an an interesting, to say the least, kind of ways of going about that. And then in the Minnesota game, you have Hakstol pulling the goalie with what, like 5 minutes left, a little over
Yep, it
5
was
minutes
five
left.
5:20.
Yeah. So that's something that is, again, highly
And then also
unusual
getting
to
scored
see
on
it that
14
far out.
seconds later.
Right. And again, it didn't really work. It kind of happened to coincide with a change of possession in the offensive zone where Minnesota gains control of the puck, and now your goalie has just been freshly pulled, and all of a sudden you're down again. So um, two different kinds of results for pulling the goalie. I mean, the end result was always the same, but certainly the ways of going about it was very different in each of them. One of them, I think, for both of us, was far more inexcusable than the other, and that is, of course, the horrible everything in the Anaheim one. We'll start with that one. How do you line change while also pulling the goalie? Like, I just don't even understand that with possession in the offensive zone.
I I think what says it best is the fact that we couldn't remember ever having seen that before. I mean, you and I have watched a lot of hockey in our lives, and I remember that night after the post game, I just point blank asked you, "Hey, Dylan, can you remember in all your time watching hockey, can you think of a worse executed goalie pull?" And you said no, and I agreed. I couldn't think of anything else. I have never seen that before. Um, and it was just flat out baffling. And then also to not put the extra skater on, the cherry on top. Um, yeah, it's just inexcusable. Just that kind of poor execution. There's nothing you can really say to defend that.
No, but there is something to be said for pulling the goalie with a lot of time. Why don't you explain kind of what the analytics say about that, and how, while a lot of people were maybe critical of that decision, you and I maybe stood a little bit behind Hakstol and said, no, I mean, there is some logic to it.
Right. And so for when it happens, again, the early goalie pull, this time with over 5 minutes to go in the Minnesota game, I think the conversation kind of shifted, away from the execution, instead to how early the goalie pull was and the timing of it. And this is one where Hackstall actually does, have some numbers, have some analytics on his side. Um, I know it seems like with the empty net, especially with them getting scored on so quickly after the goalie pulls both times, it just seems like this obvious thing that, well, yeah, you're going to get scored on right away. But, looking at the history of all these goalie pulls, you actually don't get scored on, as quickly or as often as you would think. And that, looking at the history of it, the earlier you pull your goalie, the more likely you are to score that tying goal that you need. You're also obviously more likely, to give up, an empty net goal. But, at that point, you don't care. You just need the tying goal. That's what the goalie pull is all about. So the numbers actually do back up Hackstall there as far as the early goalie pulls. And we do know this is an organization that, that values analytics, and that, that was one of the reasons that Hackstall was chosen. Maybe in opposition to some of these other candidates, where he certainly believed in the organizational mindset on that. And I'm kind of surprised it's even taken this long before we've seen a super early goalie pull, because I figure that's something that they kind of believe in the organization top down. I don't think there's a whole lot of people that, that disagree with that element of it, that, working in hockey ops for the team. So yeah, and I think Dylan and I are kind of in agreement in general that pulling your goalie earlier is a fine thing to do. But you've got to execute on it. You can't do it during a change of possession. You certainly can't do it during a full line change. And you've got to actually put the extra skater out there. I mean, anything to add to that, Dylan?
No, I mean, the whole mess of that was just ridiculous, and I think, as you said, it's best summed up just in the fact that neither of us have ever seen that before.
Yeah.
So
I have
yeah.
one more question on the goalie pulls, though, because going forward, there's a chance the Kraken might be down a goal or two toward the end of a game. I think this is a situation that's going to come up again. And if you were, if you were Dave Hakstol, would you continue to, let's say you're down two, would you pull the goalie with, 3.5 minutes to go, give or take? Or, and this is something that, that my dad kind of pointed out to me because he's been watching the games, and he's like, if I'm Haxel, I wouldn't even, I just, even if you think it's the right thing to do analytically, just given the amount of criticism that's been on you for this, it's going to look bad. If you get scored on again, it's just going to look worse on you, and it's just something you don't want to deal with, even if the analytics say that that it's what you should be doing, that you just shouldn't do it, at least in the near term. What do you think about that?
I don't necessarily agree with that. I think if it's something that fits your philosophy, I think you have to kind of ride or die by that. I don't like kind of coaching out of fear in that sense.
Hmm.
I think if you're making that decision because you're worried about having to face some criticism from the media and fans later, I don't think you're then in a position to be doing your best job, regardless of what aspect of the game it is. So I don't know that I agree with that. I think if I was him, I would stick to it and I would keep doing it. And every time it didn't work, instead of worrying about the criticism and stuff, I would be talking with the team about how what lessons can be learned from it, and how we can do things differently each time. If losing possession right away is becoming a problem, then I personally look at, okay, how are we losing possession? What are the signs that we're going to be losing possession, so that maybe then I can read it differently and pull the goalie at a different time where we're not going to immediately lose possession. And then on the flip side, I would look at it and I would tell guys like, look, if we send out the message that the goalie is being pulled, maybe instead of trying to press in those moments, because both times we saw possession lost with them pressing towards the net, and possession was lost behind the goal line each time,
Yes,
right?
that
It
is
was
true.
kind of lost behind the net. If maybe I tell them, look, if you're that defenseman playing the near side of the benches, when you hear the goalie being pulled, communicate that to the forwards and maybe cycle it back to the D for a sec. Cycle it back to the blue line. Let's make sure we retain possession while the extra attacker gets out there, and then we can move forward with our 6 men system. I would use both of those opportunities as a place to learn, and like I said, see where the problems were with losing possession, both for the players and for yourself, as far as recognizing it and pulling the goalie when you did. And I would adjust those things before I would stop doing it, because I do think that it's one of those things. This is the benefit of an 82 game season. The analytics show it works out more times than it doesn't. Then go ahead and keep doing it, and eventually it will work out more times than it doesn't. Um, I would be afraid of the small sample size. I would really only be afraid of repeating the Ducks incident.
Yeah, exactly. As long as the execution is fine, and I think you said it well. That's you could take it as a learning moment, and again, make sure you get the execution better. But I am with you. I don't have a problem with the early goalie pulls, in and of itself. But the execution needs to be there.
Yeah, but that will kind of segue us into the other big topic of conversation from this past week, and a lot of debate on places like Twitter or in our live chats during our post game lives, and that has been, have some of the struggles been goaltending or defense? I
Yep.
think a lot of people have asked that question. A lot of people have been debating that. We've continued to kind of see some soft goals. We've continued to see some, either breakaways or odd man rushes going the other way that have resulted in goals. Um, there's been a lot of that. So RJ, I'll just ask you straight up: are the goaltenders to blame, or is this on the defense?
It's not, it's not the most interesting answer, but there's elements of both. um, I think we have our criticisms of what the defense has done, losing guys. But if you're gonna make me pick one, I gotta say the goaltending. Um, you look at you know you look at some of the defensive numbers that the Kraken have put up, and generally they're not allowing a ton of high danger chances against. It's not good. They're not in the top like half of the league, but they do allow. I think as of 2 games ago, the fewest shots on goal of any team in the NHL, which that certainly doesn't tell the whole story, but you look at the statistics, and defensively they're allowing enough that they're not allowing too much, basically, that they should be giving up as many goals as they are. And look at any goaltending metric you want. Goals saved above expected, goals saved above average, the good old save percentage, anything you want to look at. And the Kraken goaltending has been either, the worst or top three, bottom three worst in the league. So I think goaltending is generally more responsible than the defense, but I think there's certainly elements of both. What do you think, Dylan?
Yes, I would agree with you there that I think while it's really a team problem, and I think the forwards are also to blame for some of this too, particularly some of these bad losses in the offensive zone that lead to some of the breakaway opportunities and stuff. Um, I do think that goaltending, if you're having to kind of put a majority of blame on one of those two, it's got to go on goaltending because the bottom line is I understand that the D might be putting you in higher danger opportunities, and that is definitely something that needs to be talked about. At the end of the day, we've seen so many soft goals go in. And it's normal. You'll see some here and there from a goalie throughout a year, right? That's normal. But for a while now, it's almost seeing like there's at least one a night, and it's kind of regardless of which goalie's in. And that's the scary thing is that it's not just like, oh, it's just Grubauer that's having this problem. Drieger's having this problem too, and just we're just seeing easy saves at sometimes key moments go in, and they just kind of end up becoming these backbreakers for the whole team, and and that's really ultimately the worst thing you can do as a goalie is kind of kill momentum for your team, right?
Absolutely.
That's one of the things that makes this position so difficult and why the mentality of goaltenders has to be what it is. But that's really the one cardinal sin that there is for a goalie, and that's if the team's doing something like in that Ducks game where you've clawed back from 2-goal deficits multiple times, but then you're going to just let Kevin Shattenkirk walk in on you and let it squeak through under your arm, a very stoppable shot. That's just one of those things you just can't do.
No, and it makes a big difference. And I try not to talk about the Sharks too much. They're the team I followed before the Kraken, but I do think it's applicable here as a team that for the last maybe 3 years, 4 years, what had probably problems with both goaltending and defense. They had just about league worst goaltending. So I feel like I've seen this before, but it wasn't entirely the goalie's fault. The defense was quite porous, and you would often hang out the goalie to dry a few times. But you look at this season; they're finally starting to get some good goaltending, and it's made a big difference early. And it shows that it can kind of cover for some defensive miscues. So I just think goaltending is that much more important, even though it can be both, that are responsible. But that brings me to a question though that we've been getting a little bit is: are the goalies really this bad? Like, is Grubauer that bad? Is Drieger that bad? Or are we just seeing a rough patch? What do you think, Dylan?
Yeah, I guess we'll start with Drieger because the sample size for Drieger, historically is a lot smaller than with Grubauer's. Um, so I do think that while Drieger was very, very, very good last year, I do think that there's maybe some in some ways a regression towards the mean with him in some respects. Like um, he's been good playing largely smaller roles on a pretty good team, right, in Florida. He didn't really play any games with Ottawa, 3 games in 3 years. You can't look at that at all. But the last two previous seasons in Florida, while he's been very good, those were very good Florida teams defensively. Both their defensemen and their forward groups are good. And you're still only talking about a 35-game sample size.
Mm-hmm.
So I know expectations were high for him coming in, but I do think that this is one of those instances where, he we didn't totally know that he was a great goaltender right out of the gates anyway. Um,
Yeah, and
we've
that's a
never
good
seen,
point.
yeah.
On the flip side, do we have enough of a sample size? I mean, you want to use a small sample size in that way. Do we have enough of a sample size with the Kraken? I mean, to make really any kind of judgment, because he's played 88 minutes. for the Kraken this season. You got a 60-minute game. He's played 88 minutes, so less than a game and a half. I mean, is that really enough to go off of?
No, and it's not even close. And I think that's something we've all wanted to see more of is to see more of him. I do think it's a thing for any goaltender. The more reps they get, the more comfortable they're going to get with the team in front of them. I think that's very important for an expansion team like this or any goaltender changing teams. So that's kind of applicable to both him and Grubauer. Is at some point, it just takes reps and time to get comfortable understanding how your D plays in front of you, what kinds of shots they're going to let through, what kinds of guys they're going to let through, that kind of stuff. So I do think Drieger, he needs absolutely to have a larger sample size here. And we did see he is a goalie who is perfectly capable of getting very, very hot and being unbeatable. But in order to do that, he's got to play.
Exactly. Moving on to Grubauer, because this is kind of the more pressing one. He's clearly been treated as the starter so far. Is Grubauer really this bad? And for me anyway, the answer is certainly no. You look over his NHL career and over 220 game sample size, and the numbers have been stellar. I don't think he's an 880 save percentage goalie, and you've got to think those numbers are going to regress, toward the mean at some point, right?
Yeah, and I'm sure they will. The one thing I will say about the just looking at save percentage for any of the goaltenders on the Kraken is the Kraken are very good at limiting shot attempts, but they're not very good at limiting high danger shot attempts.
Exactly.
So
So that
the
is
save,
definitely worth pointing out.
yeah, so just looking at save percentage for any goalie who's playing in the crease for the Kraken, it's going to inherently look worse because they're going to be facing a lot more high danger chances while facing less chances in general. So there's not going to be a lot of stuff to kind of pad their stats there. As far as Grubauer, I mean, I have two trains of thoughts with Grubauer. One, which is he's been very, very consistent throughout his career, and he's been a very, very consistent good goalie, right? He's always been an above average goaltender. He's always looked good. Um, but on the flip side, he's always looked good playing on very good teams, and he's always looked good largely as a backup or as kind of a 1B type goalie. Really, you could argue last year was the only year he was a team's bona fide number one starter throughout his whole career. And so there is the question of, why is that the case? If he is really good, is it just because he was always stuck behind great netminders? Or is it because maybe there is just something to him that isn't quite at, number one true starter level?
Yeah, and it's a question worth asking, and certainly given the amount of money in term that they kind of threw his way, and given what the record is, he showed certainly all the signs. I mean, season after season he would play fantastically. I mean, he really didn't have a bad season in the NHL, you know, through his whole career. When the Kraken signed him, but yeah, you see the workload. The 40 games played last season was his kind of career high in a season. So there is that question about him, but I think he's certainly not as bad as he has been. A big sample size of numbers bear that out. You talked about, and I think it is a good warning for fans looking at this, and the kind of the story that save percentage doesn't tell. I am certainly more of a fan of goals saved above expected, which does take shot quality into account. And Grubauer, of course, also last place in the NHL in that metric as well. So just kind of all around, and that's what I meant when I was talking about no matter what metric you look at, it's bad. But there's reason to believe that it won't stay that bad, going forward.
Yeah, I mean, we virtually never seen goalies stay kind of at like all-time lows for a long stretch of time. This very well could just be an instance of both goalies are cold. Obviously, Drieger had to deal with an injury there, so that's partly why he hasn't seen as much time. So you just happen to run into having both goaltenders go cold at the same time, and then you just, it's really hard to win games. But at the same time, that's where you look back to, well, we're only 15 games into a season. That can easily change. you get both goaltenders hot. You look at like Vegas last year, right? There were certainly stretches where you had both Flower and Leonard both red hot and also ice cold, and the team kind of went with that. And that is one of the things that I think we talked a little bit about going into this season. When you have two goaltenders who are kind of capable of doing that and kind of capable of shouldering a load for a time, um, you want to try to manage it so that you can kind of ride the hot hand. If there is no hot hand, you're just kind of stuck until someone figures it out for a little while. And I think that's probably where we're at.
Yeah, but it gives some hope that things can be turned around, because there's nothing more powerful in hockey than having a hot goalie that you can ride.
Mhm.
And it's gotten plenty of teams out of the basement of the standings in the past. And the Kraken, it seems, certainly have two goaltenders who are capable of doing that, even if they haven't yet. So that's probably the biggest key to them, getting back into the playoff race.
Yeah, the Blues of a couple seasons ago, that Stanley Cup team. I mean, that is the team to look at as far as maybe how they did it, and certainly to look at for inspiration for all of us as Kraken fans to know that yes, while things look really rough right now, you certainly are not out of hope at all.
For sure. I mean, they were last place in the NHL standings, the whole NHL in January.
Yeah.
We're imagine, 2 months from now, the Kraken are in last place.
Mhm.
That's where they were, and they won the Stanley Cup. So, it's
Right.
certainly,
And a lot of that was because Binnington got red hot.
yes, huge part of that. And I think you bring up a good point as far as them as a team to emulate, because, there was that Binnington getting hot, and also just this refocus on, they brought in a new coach, Craig Berube, and he focused on, establishing a defensive identity of, we defend, we, play in low scoring games, and we're going to suffocate the offense of any team we're playing against. And we're going to, and that of course relies on, having that good goaltending, but they got it. And I think that's, a model that the Kraken could follow.
I mean, they're certainly built for it, right?
Absolutely.
Not just with their depth defensively, but also with a lot of the forward group that they have is guys that are more than capable of playing very strong defensively. And I do wonder if that's partly what's contributed to the high danger chances for the Kraken giving up to other teams is because the forwards are maybe so focused on transition games right now,
Mm-hmm.
kind of to round things out by going back to that, and maybe they're not back checking in the same way that they were. Certainly when you look at the amount of shots given up close and through the slot, that that isn't just on the defense there. That's also where you're talking about, kind of where is the center as far as that being their defensive responsibility.
Yep.
So, but yes, I guess, long story short, it's kind of on both. But if you had to pin us down on something, goaltending has slightly been a bigger problem than the defense at the moment. But again, going back to what we talked about earlier, I feel like with a lot of the defensive miscues, a lot of it's stuff that can be coached out.
Yeah, I think so. And again, it gives some hope really in both areas, for it to be turned around. The defensive miscues are the kind of things that you can improve and that can be coached. I certainly don't think it's from a lack of talent.
Mhm. Yeah. So, anything else you had to say on that?
No, I think that just about covers the question. I mean, you both have to be improved, but I think both can be, and certainly with the goaltending, I think it will be.
Yeah, for sure. I also agree. Then I think that's going to do it for this episode of the podcast. Thanks everybody for joining us for this one. One last time, happy birthday, RJ,
Thanks,
and
Dylan.
we'll look forward to this week for the Kraken. Hopefully, turn things around here um, as the schedule starts to get tougher. But we at least got this first game against Chicago. Hopefully, that can be the rebound game, and we'll get things going there. Thanks everybody, and we will see you all next time.